So PPMD came out with a video recently to talk about where he is in regards to his recovery. And I'm going to just more talk about gameplay elements to him and how I would seed him if he were to enter a tournament today versus roughly how I think he would do. So when we last saw PPMD, there were probably two events that really come to mind. It's Genesis 2015 or 2014, Genesis whatever, Genesis 3, and Battle of Five Gods. Now in Genesis 3, he did decent. I believe he beat Lucky and SFAT. He lost to Armada, lost to Mango, got fifth, which is a decent performance. And at Battle of Five Gods, he kind of fell apart, lost stamina, and and didn't do so hot in the round two pool. Now, depending on how you view PPMD, I feel that most people probably have a very optimistic view of PPMD. And I'm not trying to use this video to trash talk PPMD. I have tremendous respect for him. But I think what we tend to do is we ignore, everything about PPMD's gameplay that we didn't, or results that weren't as good, and we kind of latch on to the best of PPMD. And I think sometimes we get this really biased perception of him, like when PPMD comes back, he's easily top 6 in the world, despite the fact that he didn't really take, his record in just game count alone against gods was very poor. But if I were to look at his gameplay first and foremost, I think he's still a really good player, even though he hasn't played for 2 years, and I'll talk about things that carry over very well. So first and foremost, I think PPMD's macro game, and in particular his dash dance game, his mid-range game, and his understanding of footsies is incredibly strong, and in fact, stronger than most top 10 to 15 level players even today, even though those players have had a 2-year edge on PPMD. What we see and what we can use as evidence to PPMD's gameplay comes from last year at best, and even then PPMD was probably not playing at his best, being sick and not having regular practice. So neutral game, I think, is going to be very good. I think that especially against floaty characters where he can just abuse the dash dance, abuse ranges, abuse just his knowledge of the game that other people don't really have. I think he's incredible there. The big issue that I think I have with PPMD coming back, and this kind of has hurt him in many games, especially against the other Big Six members, is that his punish game isn't very consistent. And this is, of course, me comparing PPMD to other top 5 to top 10 level players. This isn't to say that PPMD's punish game is bad, but if you look at old videos, he frequently ends his combos earlier than most other players, especially when you compare him to Mutaking, which, to be honest, is not really a good comparison because Mutaking is really good at punishing. But when you look at PPMD's punishes, they often get cut short or he flubs something, and there's a lot of instances where if you just were to look at the video and you go like, okay, like how much damage can he get off this opening? You'll find that more often than not, it's a lot less than what you would normally expect from another top 10 player. And I think that becomes an issue because the neutral game of other players has gone a lot stronger, so PPMD is not going to get as many opportunities to hit his opponent, whereas now his opponents are hitting a lot harder. And one thing that PPMD has mentioned in his video, and this is of course me assuming that PPMD isn't going to be practicing a lot, maybe he practices for a few weeks before he enters his first major, is how he deals with SDI, slide off, people who know how to slide off platforms and do all the little things to escape. I think in particular when you watch players like Leffen and even Mango and Hungrybox, just to give a few examples, is that they often escape combos faster than other people because of their knowledge of SDI and how to maneuver platforms in a way that they escape from techs. So I think that's the big adjustment PPMD is going to have to make in moving forward. And to be honest, I think that at Genesis 3 when he played Armada, he could have won at least one, maybe even 2 games if he just tightened up his punish game and he executed better on that. There were a lot of punishes where he got a grab and it led to nothing. So that's a big worry I have for him. And potentially when we look at like top 20 players, I think the big thing that could be worrisome are the spacey players that just really hit hard. And even players like Drug Fox who are really good at his shield, I'm not sure how consistently PPMD gets openings on those type of players where he would get free hits on people just because PPMD's game knowledge was just a lot better. And I think the other issue that kind of comes up is the fact that PPMD is very likely going to stick to one character. And if I were to make a bet, it's probably going to be Falco. But like, let's say he plays against PPU and he hasn't played Marth in a while. If you guys remember Apex 2015, PPU's Marth, this like pretty much went to town on PP's Falco, and he had to go Marth to win the matchup. But later on, when he played against S2J, S2J beat his Marth, and he had to switch to Falco. Now, keep in mind, these were still incredibly like close games, at least for S2J. So like even like a Wizzy or an S2J, I think that with like the 2 years of development they've had against Falco, that they can take games and possibly steal set off of PPMD. I think as far as floaties go, the Ducks, Lods, and for the most part, if he plays Marth, like I think he's pretty much safe in the Marth Ditto. I think he's really good against Peach. So players like Lod, Triff, and players like Zane, and a bunch of other players, I think he'll still do really well against. I just think that there's going to be other characters that PPMD is going to struggle with, especially if he plays with one character. Now, all in all, if he entered a tournament, I think it'd be reasonably fair if I were to seed him. I would put him at number 13, and that puts him right just below Drug Fox. And the reason why I would see him at 13, some people may say that's a little high. Most people will probably say, oh my gosh, like you disrespect him, that's really low. I think it's more to give credit to the people that have been playing and turning out results. I don't think it's really fair for people who have been working really hard towards getting good seeding, and you know they've been getting results, to have a person that hasn't been playing over a year to give PPMD the nod over those players like SJ, Chu, Drug Fox, Axe, SFAT, Wizzy. I don't think it's really fair. Although there could be an argument where that you could put PPMD around 10th seed, just ahead of SUJ and Drug Fox, and I can see an argument to that. But I don't think it's the most. I don't think it's fair to the players that have been playing the entire year. Now, in terms of results, I think it could go a variety of ways. I think it's wide open in terms of what we could see from PPMD coming back to a major. I'm not sure when that happens, but we're going to make the assumption that he plays for a good month, which I think is a lot of practice. I think that, I think there's still a pretty big gap, even with a month's training, between him and, let's say, Leffen and Plup, who are probably going to be around 4 to 6 on the SSBM rank. I could see Axe giving PPMD a really hard time. But I could see PPMD like making some upsets. I can see him beating a player like SFAT. I could see him giving Mutaking's Marth some trouble. I could see him making upsets and beating a lot of the members of the top 20 pretty well. But at the same time, I could see members of the top 20 bringing an upset to him, so in the round of like 16 or round of 32 in winners, and then him losing shortly after for 17th or 13th. I think that can happen, and I think it's very reasonable to assume. And keep in mind, he's been out of practice for a really long time. At the same time, I can see him getting potentially 5th or 7th at a Genesis Evo type of event. So the door is wide open. It's going to be really interesting to see how he comes back. And all in all, I'm not trying to diss PPMD in any sort of way, but if people are asking like how do you think he's going to do, those are my opinions and some of what I view are his strengths, and some of his weaknesses that he's going to need to patch up based on what I've seen from a year ago. Of course, a lot's changed, so this is just my opinion. Hopefully I don't get flamed too hard for this. It's kind of interesting to see. I hope I get to hear your opinions down the road as well.